Alright, so here we are in front of the elephants.
It was a pretty sunset.
Howdy, and welcome back to Film Asterisk. We are deep into winter here in Vermont. We got our first big storm of the season a few days ago, and things do not seem to be letting up anytime soon. But today, we induct another topic into our running segment we call Deep Picks, highlighting lesser-known but intriguing additions of a genre or era or film movement or director's or actor's filmography. Today, John Lithgow, one of the great American actors whose celebrated career has spanned nearly 50 years now. Most probably know him from his iconic roles in Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, Brian De Palma's Blowout, which might be my favorite, as well as his two biggest performances, known by our generation, I'd say, the monoliths of many of our youths, 1984's Footloose and 2001's Shrek. He also has many well-known contemporary entries like Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Interstellar, Pet Sematary, and Bombshell. But among his nearly 80 films he's been in, there's some pretty beautiful hidden gems, 3 of which we'll be highlighting today. Quick background, John Arthur Lithgow, born 1945 into a theater family, studied at Harvard University and the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art before becoming known for his work on the stage and screen. He's been the recipient of numerous accolades, including 2 Golden Globes, 6 Emmys, 3 SAG Awards, and 2 Tonys. And he has also received nominations for 2 Academy Awards, and also a BAFTA and 4 Grammys, so heavily awarded actor. So among his fully realized and acclaimed stage career, he still finds time to be in many, many films. I feel like he is just one of those true working actors, it seems. So let's see what deep picks there are to be found. And before I start, I just wanted to shout out a personal favorite of mine. I won't be mentioning, but I kind of want to. It's his role in 1998's A Civil Action. Showed up in my 2022 film discovery list, and one of only 3 films directed by Steven Zaillian, who you might know as being primarily a writer whose more well-known credits include Schindler's List, The Irishman, Gangs of New York, Mission Impossible, Moneyball, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And now you're thinking to yourself, wow, the same guy wrote all those? Yeah, Steven Zaillian, check him out. But John Lithgow plays the judge in A Civil Action, and I've already kind of discussed it. But yeah, he does just play a pretty interesting part in the film. If you want to hear a little bit more, but not much, that's in my 2022 Film and Discovery. It's the season 5 finale. But yeah, John Lithgow. His 2 Oscar nominations come from his performances in 1982's The World According to Gulp and 1983's Terms of Endearment, but we won't be talking about either of those. No, we're moving on to 1984, and a fascinating sequel to a well-renowned 60s sci-fi film. Yes, first up, we begin with kind of a quick one, actually. 1984's 2010, the year we made contact.
I'm getting nauseous.
If you warm you'll choke. Don't close your eyes. Look at the middle of Discovery. The middle, not the ends. Look at the part where it's moving the least. Don't take your eyes off it.
I feel so stupid. How do you say stupid?
Durak.
That's me.
You shouldn't feel like that. The same thing happened to me the first time I did this.
I found the hatch.
Someday I'll want to talk about this film in a bit more detail, as I think it warrants a pretty lengthy discussion in the annals of film history, so I'll try and keep this just to John Lithgow's role. But I will say this is a unique just fascinating film that isn't afraid to be its own film with the groundbreaking monolith that was Stanley Kubrick's telling of the first book in this series, 2001, A Space Odyssey, back in 1968. As far as sequels go, it has a lot to live up to, and it kind of does a pretty okay job at it. Quick plot: in 2001, the Discovery spacecraft was lost, along with its crew and the 𝙅𝙤𝙝 AI robot. It's now 2009, and the United States wishes to make it back to Jupiter to discover what happened to their ship. Except, in this version of 2009, the Soviet Union isn't gone. In fact, they're still deep in their space program, and are trying to beat the Americans to Jupiter themselves. To make it to Jupiter before the Discovery's orbit decays and crashes into the planet, the U.S. must hitch a ride on the Soviet vessel, which has already been made and is ready for launch in a short few weeks. John Lithgow plays Dr. Walter Kurnow, the Earthbound engineer who originally designed the Discovery spacecraft from 2001, who has been brought on this journey to Jupiter for his knowledge of the ship. He's not an astronaut by trade, and has one of the most iconic scenes in the film where he has to make a spacewalk while under tremendous stress to examine the dilapidated spacecraft that is the Discovery. During this, his Soviet partner encourages him, and so does Roy Scheider from the main spacecraft of the film, the Soviet-built Leonov. So Lithgow kind of plays like the out-of-depth scientist who is one of the first of anyone to offer an olive branch to the constant theme of Soviet-American tensions that the film exists in. On Earth, there's this blockade off the coast of Nicaragua that threatens war, and the Soviet and American scientists on the spaceship always are just trying to find ways to work together and just be scientists, not politicians, as Roy Scheider's character puts it. Also, the three Americans on board that have hitched a ride with the Soviets are arguably some of my favorite Americans from the late 70s. Roy Scheider, John Lithgow, and Bob Balaban. It's a very good trio. And in some ways as well, Bob Balaban and John Lithgow kind of work as a duo to the protagonistic Heywood Floyd, which is Roy Scheider's character. Each with a specific job to do as scientists, but each has kind of a different relationship to Floyd, and they're often just playing little pranks and all politely at each other's throats for one reason or another. The character development in 2010 is certainly more at the forefront here, and I think John Lithgow really benefits from this. As a more classically trained stage actor, I think many of these scenes are allowed to play out sometimes like they may just be on a stage production of 2010, and you can kind of feel how John Lithgow plays his role and how the environment sort of informs it. There's like this mystery, dread, and just out of one's depth that he encapsulates pretty well. So 2010, check it out. Probably one of my more favorite sequels to come out with that first sort of introduction to sequels, starting with Godfather Part 2 and just moving into this era of getting the second chapter of a movie. But this isn't just 2001 Part 2. This is like its own story, so I think it holds up quite well. But yeah, moving on to perhaps one of John Lithgow's most fun screen roles of his career, a film that is released right after 2010. In fact, I consider doing an episode merely entitled Lithgow 84 because this is an amazing year for him, with 2010, Footloose, and our next film. But he was also in a film called The Glitter Dome, and I kind of just didn't want to watch it, to be honest, so we're moving on. We are discussing 2 of his 4 films from 1984, and the second one we are talking about today is the classic film The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. Now, if you haven't heard of this film, I am happy to be the one to inform you of its existence because it got a sneaky good cast and is the perfect amount of bonkers for a fun 80s B film. It's starring Peter Weller, John Lithgow, Ellen Balkin, Jeff Goldblum 2 years before The Fly, Christopher Lloyd 1 year before Back to the Future, and Clancy Brown. The film centers upon the efforts of Dr. Buckaroo Banzai, a physicist, neurosurgeon, test pilot, and rock star, thrust into the position of needing to save the world by defeating a band of interdimensional aliens called Red Lectroids from Planet 10, and a crazed antagonistic Italian scientist, Dr. Lizardo. Dr. Lizardo, an original theorist on Buckaroo's new perfected invention, the overthruster, conducted a failed test of the device in 1938 and allowed the Red Lectroid's tyrannical leader, Lord John Wolfen, to take over Lizardo's mind and enable several dozen of his allies to escape. That all happens, that's all real, that is in the movie. For the role of Dr. Emilio Lizardo, the studio wanted to cast an unknown actor, but Mack Rauch had written the role with John Lithgow in mind. And like Weller, Lithgow was not sure about the character, but the director convinced him by claiming what a real feast for an actor this wonderful Jekyll and Hyde character was. Lithgow told an interviewer after the movie that I've had roles where I come very close to going over the top. In Twilight Zone, I almost went over the top several times, but this role is completely over the top. It makes the role in Twilight Zone seem like a model of restraint. I'd do it in a wild red fright wig and rotten false teeth with a thick Italian accent. It's wild. For Lizardo's accent, Lithgow actually spent time with an Italian tailor at MGM and recorded his voice. Film credit to Roberto Terminelli, John Lithgow's dialect coach, in the credits of the film. Lithgow changed his walk as well to that of an old crab because my alien metabolism is supposed to be messed up, he said of his character. Playing Lizardo felt like playing the madman in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Here in the New Jersey, coming to destroy us. We must act, escape, or die. We must work faster to finish the great vehicle itself, so we can enter the 8th dimension and free our trapped comrades. So we can return home and seize power once again. What is the greatest joy? The joy of beauty! Louder! The joy of beauty! History is made at night. Character is what you are in the dark. We must work while the clock she's ticking. We hide, they seek. Step to the back of the car. Where are we going? When? Real soon!
And it is kind of interesting, if you look at 1984, you have two really major antagonistic roles for John Lithgow. You have Footloose with him as like the pastor of the town, and then you have this one, which is a very different kind of villain. It's a very cartoony villain, and it's just really fun. Dr. Lizardo's 1938 laboratory was filmed at a deserted industrial site, Alpha Tubing. The set decorators rented a collection of 1930s electrical props originally used in the original Boris Karloff Frankenstein films. Weller remembers that during the scene where his character is tortured by Dr. Lizardo, I was laughing at the banter between Christopher Lloyd and John Lithgow. I never laughed so hard in my life. They had to stop takes over and over on that segment. And it's funny because despite all this fun wackiness and 12 weeks of ridiculous and zany principal photography in 1983, here comes the sort of tragic part of the film's story. The studio made no attempts to sell the film to a mainstream audience with traditional promotion, although there were some magazine advertisements, primarily in Marvel Comics, and related licensing which served as viral advertising in limited venues. Studio publicist Rosemary LaSalamandra said, "Nobody knew what to do with Buckaroo Banzai. There was no simple way to tell anyone what it was about. I'm not sure anybody knew." Lithgow said, "I've tried to explain the storyline to people and it takes about an hour. I mean it. It's that complicated. But it's terrific. Every time I tell people about it, I get so excited that I end by saying, Buckaroo Banzai, remember where you heard it first." Buckaroo Banzai was originally scheduled to be a release on June 8th, 1984, but it was pushed back to August 10th. And that might have been just the worst day, because it opened on 236 screens and faced stiff competition against Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Ghostbusters. It made $600,000 on its opening weekend before finally grossing $6 million in North America, earning back less than half of its production costs. It was dismissed by many critics as strange and unintelligible at the time of its release, but as time went on, a small cult following formed and people began to realize the demented genius the movie began to represent, kind of as a parody of the 80s action film, but also as a shining example of the 80s action film, and all its just fun, nutso wackiness. Toll.com perhaps gives Buckaroo Banzai the most glowing review, saying that the film is paradoxically decades ahead of its time, and yet completely of its time. It's profoundly a movie by, for, and of geeks and nerds at a time before geek nerd culture was really mainstreamed, and a movie whose pre-CG special effects and pre-computer age production design were an essential part of its good-natured enthusiasm. What at the time was a hip, modern take on classic sci-fi is now, 30 years later, almost indistinguishable from the sci-fi cinema that inspired it in terms of the appeal to modern viewers, the charmingly old-fashioned special effects, and the comparatively innocent earnestness of its tone. And Lithgow is one of a pretty remarkable ensemble cast of actors who dedicated their time and energy to creating a fun, unique film. I guess that is my retelling of the mythic film that is The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. And remember, no matter where you go, there you are.
Hey now. Don't be mean. We don't have to be mean. Because, remember, no matter where you go, there you are.
Alright, for our final film, we leave the 80s and transport fall into the future year, 2014. This is our third pick, and it's really the only contemporary pick that I've included here, and for good reason, as it is very much just the only leading performance I'm including. John Lithgow, in so many of his iconic roles, is such a strong supporting performer, but here he is up front and center in 2014's Love is Strange. And again, I think the appeal that comes with this one, as it is with the others, is the stacked cast, namely John Lithgow, Alfred Molina, and Marissa Tomei. The plot kind of reads as this. New York City. John Lithgow and Alfred Molina are recent newlyweds when Alfred Molina is fired from his job as a choir teacher when the Archdiocese of New York hears of his recent wedding to his husband. This causes their lives to turn chaotic as we watch them fall into the lives of their friends and families, hopping from apartment to apartment in this kind of like kaleidoscopic view of city lifestyle in 2014 New York City. John Lithgow's character Ben spends a good chunk of the film with his nephew and his wife, Marissa Tomei, and their son, and he sort of works as a puttering painter, a bit of a wisecracker, and overall aging artist who is, again, out of his depth with his extended family and staying close to his husband during their turbulent post-wedding bliss. Bliss kind of in air quotes there. There are also plenty of just surprise performances this film. Eric Tobak as Vlad, the Russian classmate of Marissa Tomei's son, as well as Charlie Tahan, who plays Marissa Tomei's son, Joey. While John Lithgow deals with a straining family relationship, Alfred Molina sort of works in a B-plot of sorts with another gay couple and their rowdy group of 20-somethings, which leaves their apartment loud and crazy, playing D&D and watching Game of Thrones. Yes, it's a very 2014 movie, I'll say that. The strongest moments of the film are, for me, no surprise, the scenes where John Lithgow and Alfred Molina get to act together, and I mean, those are just really the highlights. And the Rotten Tomatoes consensus, once again, really just kinda captures this movie perfectly. Held aloft by remarkable performances from John Lithgow and Alfred Molina, Love is Strange serves as a graceful tribute to the beauty of commitment in the face of adversity. For Lithgow, I truly feel like this is such a mature and interesting role that he's allowed to play with such sincerity and subtlety. He really knows how not to turn the heat up all the way, but really just kind of let it simmer, you know, culminating in a slow boil of a performance that really sticks in your head. And if the range wasn't clear to you before, John Lithgow really can run the gamut of emotional states, even with something like the egomaniacal Napoleon complex that is Lord Farquaad in Shrek. I mean, he mentions this also in his interview about Buckaroo Banzai. I've had roles where I came very close to going over the top, and with Buckaroo Banzai, this role was very completely over the top. Love is Strange is far from over the top. I mean, the film's kind of lilting grand piano score and simple, beautiful premise kind of just does what it needs to be, you know? An emotionally gripping film without being some grand statement or bombastic experience. It really, like, revels in its own simplicity, and it's for the better. I really appreciate that. It's a bummer just because this film has got the cast, the story, the social commentary, and yeah, I wish just more people knew about it. And I guess that's why it shows up on an episode of Deep Picks. But, I mean, if you want to see a touching story of a long-lasting love torn asunder, and also a movie with John Lithgow, I think this is for you. So much of the film is just filled with moments of appreciation for life. As the audience, we attend beautiful concerts, watch paintings be made on quiet rooftops in New York City, cheers to lost friends, etc. And around it all, the unshaken love of Ben and George's relationship is one of those kind of just things we get to be a part of. Not enough films remember to be tense but optimistic about love. An article from The Guardian makes a great mention of this. For obvious reasons, films about love often focus on either the first flush of passion or the dying embers of tenderness and toleration. Rarer is the movie that has at its heart a stable relationship in which the world itself may be out of sorts, but the lovers themselves are constant. People keep living because we got each other. And man, that's it right there.
And I guess my last question is, this movie I think is awesome because it has lots of authentic little moments, particularly between you and Alfred. And I was wondering if you had a favorite moment that strikes you as like, we achieved something in this movie that I really don't see in other movies.
I feel that way about the entire relationship. You just don't see. There have been significant groundbreaking films about gay relationships, but not between two old men. Not between men who've had a long, long history together and are so completely comfortable with each other. Which is why I think the most moving and sweet scene in the film is the bunk bed scene, where you just see they're so relieved to be able to be in the same bed together. The way an old couple is, it's got almost nothing to do with sex. It's just love. It's just proximity. And it's tactile. And yeah, I think Fred and I really achieved something wonderful there in a very simple way. What I say about this film is it's extraordinary in being so ordinary. That's just ordinary love.
And yeah, with that sunshiny sentiment, we end this kind of quick episode of Deep Picks, John Lithgow edition. Yeah, that is all. As always, you can find the films we talked about in the first 4 seasons of Film And at Connor's Letterboxd list, Cranberry18, CRAND Berry18, and the films we talk about in season 5 and 6 on my Letterboxd list at DA_N. I'll put a link to the article from The Guardian about Love is Strange below too, but yeah, that is all for today. Thanks for listening. If you've watched any of these John Lithgow films, I hope you enjoyed them. If you know any other good deep picks, be interested to hear about them. Message on Connor's review of 2019's Cats if you want to talk about any other John Lithgow deep picks on Letterboxd. But yeah, until next time, have a great rest of your day.